Would you believe that the season finale of the Book of Boba Fett was exciting, interesting, action-packed, and some of the best Star Wars content ever made? I certainly hope not, because this episode was awful, easily the worst in the entire series. Somehow, the show creators even managed to make the big action fight scenes incredibly dull and boring, with some stupid nonsense thrown in for good measure. The whole thing absolutely reeks of the sloppy, amateur work that we've come to expect from Disney. The Book of Boba Fett is bad. Episode 7. We open with Boba Fett inspecting what's left of the cantina, and while certainly there's a lot of destruction, there isn't a single body anywhere. I guess the show creators just forgot the room was completely full of people. Regardless, Mando confirms that he was able to get the help of the Marshal and that he will be raising a garrison, except that isn't what happened in the previous episode. The only thing the Marshal said was that he would try his best, but Mando acts as if it's a guaranteed thing that the entire town will be coming. Mando says the price for their help would be nothing so long as Boba Fett agrees to stop the flow of spice, and Fennec objects, saying that the spice was most of Jabba the Hutt's business, which is both wrong and dumb, but the writers probably felt the need to throw that line in there in order to make it more impactful. But the fact of the matter is, we already saw how Boba Fett views the spice. During the scene when they took over the train, he had a whole bunch of it get thrown onto the ground and he didn't even care. It's been made obvious that he doesn't like the stuff and he wants nothing to do with it. So he's probably not already even involved in the spice trade in any way whatsoever, so why would it matter if it was part of Jabba the Hutt's business? Boba Fett doesn't want anything to do with it. But regardless, they play out this scene as if Boba Fett is making some sort of really big concession into giving up the spice trade that he wasn't involved in anyways, and then he just agrees to the demands and that he won't allow it in the area anymore.
I don't want it.
While talking to his group, Boba Fett says that in their current state, they're greatly outmatched by the Syndicate, and he wants to head back to his palace in order to fortify it and prepare for an attack. Tactically, this would be the smartest move, but unfortunately, the Clown Ranger girl decides otherwise. She says that if Boba Fett wants to abandon the people of Mos Espa and run and hide in his palace, then he can, but she's gonna stay and protect the people.
She was such a strong female woman.
So Boba Fett gets pushed around by a strong female character, and because he's a complete idiot, he agrees to stay. The show creators want everyone to think that Clown Ranger Girl is being brave, noble, and intelligent, when in truth, she's making easily the most tactically stupid decision possible when it comes to not only winning, but also protecting the people.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
As we'll very clearly see throughout the rest of the episode, that the fighting will definitely put innocent people in danger, and it will also cause a significant amount of destruction to the city, because, funny enough, that sort of thing happens when you have heavy combat in the middle of a highly populated city, you moron. What Boba Fett wanted to do by going to the palace and fortifying it would have been much better in every possible way. Not only is it a secure structure, but all of their weapons and equipment would be available to them. This includes both Mando and Boba Fett's ships. Using these two ships during a fight in the city would cause an incredible amount of damage. However, the area surrounding Boba Fett's palace is fairly wide open. It means that the Syndicate would not be able to sneak up on Boba Fett's palace, and they would have to approach it in the open, which is incredibly dangerous, which would make them even more vulnerable to both Mando and Boba Fett's ships. Furthermore, any Syndicate forces that actually make it inside the palace would then have to deal with a Rancor in a relatively confined area, and unless you're a Jedi, that's almost guaranteed to end in a bad time. But on top of all of this, the fighting would be taking place away from the city, which means that all of the buildings and the people inside would be safe from the fighting. The Pike have absolutely no desire to actually harm the people of the city. They need them to be workers and to buy the spice. I mean, if there's nobody left, then you're not going to have any customers. The only reason why they were willing to target the people inside the cantina was because the cantina itself was a business owned by Boba Fett, and they wanted to prevent him from getting any more income from the cantina. In the next scene, Cad Bane meets with the Syndicate leader, and he asks about the Tuskens being willing to help Boba Fett, but the Syndicate leader says that won't happen because they were wiped out. But then, for some bizarre reason, he admits to Bane that it was the Syndicate who took out the Tuskens and not the biker aliens. There's really no logical reason why he would give up this particular information, but the story needs it to happen in order to move the plot along. Continuing, we see an X-Wing arrive at the weird mechanic lady's place, but instead of having Luke Skywalker, it's being piloted by R2-D2 with Goku sitting in the pilot seat.
Grogu? That's a terrible name.
And I have to ask, why? Why would Luke not have flown the X-Wing himself? He has no other students on that planet, and without the X-Wing, he can't leave the planet to go and do other stuff. So what exactly is he going to be doing on the planet by himself? He has all the droids that are constructing the buildings, so Luke is doing what exactly? He's just kind of sitting around and waiting for R2-D2 to return? Why?
That's just lazy writing.
And the answer is pretty simple. Even though it doesn't make sense for the story and the characters, it does make sense for the writers and the episode. It's a very convenient way to make sure that Luke was not involved in the fighting that happens in Mos Espa. If he had come in person, then he likely would have met up with Mando and then helped fight the Syndicate, which probably would have made things a lot easier to have a Jedi Master on your side. Or maybe Disney just didn't want to spend the money on CGI in order to include Luke in this episode. In either case, it seems to me like it would have been a pretty good opportunity for Luke to speak with Boba Fett, considering what happened the last time they met and, the whole incident with the Sarlacc pit. That kind of would have been interesting. And given Disney's over-heavy reliance on nostalgia bait, I am genuinely surprised that they didn't use this one.
Disqualified!
Regardless, we then get a huge amount of mostly unnecessary exposition from Fennec, where she's explaining the most basic parts of their plan to Boba Fett, stuff that he should already know. So all of this exposition is not meant to inform the characters, but rather, it's to feed all of the information to the audience, but it's done in the most long and unnecessarily boring way possible.
You hear that, Rosen? We're having fun. Whoa. Hey, I'm not having fun.
Also, I find it kind of funny that during the explanation, the reason why all of the other characters like the Clown Rangers and the Wookiee have been spread out into certain locations is to prevent the Syndicate from being able to sneak up on Boba Fett, something that wouldn't have been a problem if they had all gone to the palace like they should have.
The buffoonery is endless.
But don't worry, it gets worse. All of this nonsense is then interrupted by the arrival of Cad Bane, who taunts Boba Fett with the information that it was the Syndicate responsible for wiping out the Tuskens and not the biker aliens. Boba Fett is clearly angry, but he refuses to engage in a fight, and then Cad Bane just walks away.
What?
As I pointed out earlier, it was absurd for the Syndicate leader to divulge this information to Cad Bane, but it was done so for the sole purpose of pushing the plot forward. But now that Cad Bane has used that info to taunt Boba Fett, that means that Boba Fett's position has changed from wanting to destroy the Syndicate and push them off of Tatooine, and now it has become wanting to destroy the Syndicate and push them off Tatooine. Absolutely nothing has changed, even though Boba Fett knows this information. What was even the point? Boba learning all this has the same value that Jon Snow had when he found out he was a secret Targaryen. In other words, it's worthless.
This is terrible.
Fennec then receives communication from the Clown Rangers where they say something feels off, and the scene moves over to show all the Clown Rangers off of their bikes and just standing around at the end of what appears to be a dead-end street. These guys were supposed to be patrolling the area on their bikes, so I have no idea what they were doing just standing around here. But then suddenly a bunch of aliens start grabbing weapons from hidden locations and begin attacking the Clown Rangers. And to be perfectly honest, I was rooting for the aliens.
Thanks, noob.
It should also be noted that there's a lot of innocent people in the area that begin quickly running away, which is something that wouldn't have happened if they had fallen back to Boba Fett's palace like they should have. Moving over to the Wookiee, another group of aliens begins attacking, but for some reason not a single one of them had a blaster, which probably would have been a good idea. But it gets even dumber because rather than actually trying to cause damage to the Wookiee, their grand strategy was to just pile on top of him and hold his arms and legs down, apparently. The pig guys also get ambushed, which causes them to get pushed off a cliff, which is almost the exact same thing that happened in the movie 300, because the show creators have no talent whatsoever, which is why nothing in this show is original. The main forces of the Syndicate arrive. Finally, Boba Fett and Mando make themselves useful by using their jetpacks to ambush the Syndicate forces. However, for some dumb reason, rather than taking a position on top of a building, which would have given them a tactical advantage, they both decide to land on the ground. Obi-Wan would be very disappointed. Not that it matters much, though, considering that both of these characters are wearing Beskar armor, which, as we've seen, makes them practically immortal. Both of these characters are hit over a dozen times, but of course, every single one of these hits lands only on the pieces of Beskar, which is kind of ridiculous considering that 60 to 70% of their bodies are not being protected by Beskar. But of course, they never get hit there because apparently plot armor is even better than Beskar.
Do you get me?
And it's for all of these reasons that the fight has no tension in it whatsoever. Not even for a single second was I actually concerned about either Boba Fett or Mando. This resulted in the entire fight feeling boring and repetitive. The two would take out a couple of Syndicate, and then they would get hit on the armor a few times, whereupon they would return to taking out a couple more Syndicate. Rinse and repeat for about 2.5 minutes. When you've encased your characters in invulnerable Beskar and plot armor, there's no investment for the audience to actually care about them. But don't worry, it gets worse. Eventually, the people from Freetown arrive to the sound of dramatic, uplifting music to quote-unquote save Mando and Boba Fett, or at least that's what the show was trying to depict, but it fails utterly because both of these two are completely unharmed. At worst, they were just kind of breathing a little heavy. They were never in any real danger at all. Each of them took a dozen or more blaster hits that would have just barely knocked them back a bit. There isn't even any visual indication on the armor showing that they had been hit, no burn marks or anything. Both Mando and Boba Fett's armor looks like it's in perfect condition. The show creators were trying to set up a scenario where there were feelings of danger and high stakes, but it's all artificial because we know that both Mando and Boba Fett are totally immune to blaster fire. How is the audience supposed to feel any sense of urgency when both characters are almost completely incapable of being hurt?
You're thinking, people gonna die?
What? No.
But it gets dumber. The Clown Rangers arrive, followed by the Wookiee. However, as the Wookiee is moving towards the group, he's hit by at least 8 blaster bolts. And we've seen throughout this show and throughout most of all of Star Wars that even a single one of these is enough to take someone out, even if that person is wearing armor, as long as it's not made of magically overpowered Beskar. In fact, we saw a large group of Wookiees get wiped out from these sorts of attacks in the prequel movies, and yet here we have this Wookiee who is hit at least 8 times and really only results in simple injury. What's dumber about this, however, is maybe about a minute later, the Wookiee is going to be running around and fighting as if he had never been injured in the first place.
Got better.
Which does seem a little bit ridiculous, though now that I think of it, perhaps this Wookiee's fur is also made of Beskar.
Interesting.
The Syndicate fighters all get taken out, but then 2 very large droids make their way through the streets. The group just kind of stares at them for a while the droids spend about 30 seconds very slowly walking towards them. And then the group begins attacking the droid, but not until after the droids had activated their shield, because apparently attacking them before the shields were active was too difficult.
Mistakes were made.
Mando and Boba Fett try to distract the droids while the rest of the group escape, and of course everyone in the group went to the Prometheus school of running away as they decide to travel in the wide open down a straight road, because apparently splitting up or trying to use the buildings for cover was too difficult. Boba Fett decides he needs reinforcements and takes off on his jetpack. Mando runs in the other direction, getting one of the droids to follow him. Meanwhile, some Syndicate fighters show up, and we get this. But don't worry, it gets worse. The mechanic lady is riding into town looking for Mando, but she's acting very excited and completely oblivious to the near constant blaster fire that's happening only 100 feet away. I get it that she's trying to bring Goku back to Mando, but it simply makes no sense that she would be unaware of everything that's going on in the area, given the number of explosions and blaster fire. When Mando tells her to turn around, she even says that she can't hear him because of all the blaster fire and explosions, and yet she acts surprised when she suddenly sees the battle droid. Of course, all of this is meant to be funny, but it just comes across as dumb, because just like with Marvel, Disney insists that a certain amount of comedy be included even when it's inappropriate for the scene.
I don't think it's funny.
As they're racing away, for some unknown bizarre reason, Goku uses the Force to destroy the droid that was pulling the carriage, causing it to flip over. This results in Mando, the mechanic lady, and Goku standing completely unprotected in an open street, but for some reason the battle droid just never tries to attack them. It has a perfect line of sight, it can very easily start attacking, but it just doesn't. Instead, it very slowly walks towards them. There's simply no reason why the droid wouldn't be attacking here other than the plot just needed it not to. But if you thought that plot armor was ridiculous, just wait a second, because suddenly Boba Fett appears riding the Rancor. It makes a dramatic appearance standing on top of a building. The droid looks up and attacks about a dozen times and completely misses.
I'm sorry. What?
The Rancor is only about 30 feet away from the droid. It's not moving at all, and it's the size of a building, and yet the droid misses each and every time. Seriously, who even needs Beskar when you have plot armor? As the Rancor is fighting the droid, it manages to weaken the shield enough for Mando to sneak in and then cut it apart using the Darksaber. And the Rancor finishes off the droid. Meanwhile, the Clown Rangers and the rest of the group are fighting off the other droid and a group of Syndicate. The show makes a couple more attempts to make the Clown Ranger girl seem strong and smart, but it's obviously fake and it just looks pathetic.
We're gonna die here?
No, we fight.
Boba Fett once again arrives with the Rancor and smashes the other battle droid much easier than the first one. Then the rest of the group chase after the remaining Syndicate, but Cad Bane confronts Boba Fett and drives off the Rancor using fire, so only he and Boba Fett are left in the area. They have a duel where Boba Fett gets his ass kicked and pretty much lays on the ground for most of it, until he manages to trip Cad Bane and then finish him off using the gaffy stick. Honestly, it's not much of a fight at all.
That's very disappointing.
But what about Cad Bane? Apparently, the character was brought into the show simply to be a cameo and then get taken out, and he's not going to be used in any future stories. Easily, this is one of the most hollow forms of nostalgia bait. A little distance away, the Rancor has gone into a rage and begins attacking anyone and anything in the area. It then climbs up a tower and starts posing like King Kong, because the writers are terrible and they can't think of a single thing that would be original.
This is terrible.
And you might think that this would probably be a good time for Boba Fett to go and get control of the Rancor again, but for some reason he just doesn't. In fact, he doesn't appear at all for the rest of this entire scene. And it's not like he wouldn't know where the Rancor was, because it was constantly roaring and it climbed to the top of a tower that would have been easily seen by pretty much anyone in the area. But nope, Boba Fett never ever even tries to go and get the Rancor. Apparently he just had other stuff to do. Instead, it's Mando who fights the Rancor and tries to get it back under control, but while it's distracted, Goku uses the Force and puts the Rancor to sleep. Shortly after, Fennec arrives at the main Syndicate headquarters where their leader is speaking to the leaders of the other factions that had betrayed Boba Fett, and since this is just a small single building and the fighting has been lost for the Syndicate, you would think that it would probably be a bad location to stay. You might also think that it would be a bad idea to have only 2 guards standing outside, but remember, this is Disney Star Wars, and the show creators have no idea what they're doing.
Seems fairly obvious.
Fennec easily takes out the guards and all of the leaders within the building. And then the story seems to move forward a day or two as Boba Fett and Fennec are walking through the streets. There has been a massive amount of destruction to the buildings, and the people are trying to clean it up. Of course, everyone is treating Boba Fett as if he's some sort of wonderful leader who saved all of them, despite the fact that it was his group and the Rancor that did most of the damage. Boba Fett mentions he's still injured, and Fennec says that he should take a soak in the bacta tank, but Boba Fett says he can't because someone else is using it. Now, at first, you might think it would probably be the Wookiee since he got hit with over a dozen blaster hits, except it's not him. The Wookiee is walking around as if he's completely uninjured and just doing totally fine. Meanwhile, Boba Fett, who is wearing Beskar armor, is still somehow injured, which none of this makes any sense at all.
I'm not sure I see the consistency here.
The last scene of the main episode shows Mando flying through space with Goku sitting in the bubble behind him. As I pointed out in a previous video, it was glaringly obvious that the bubble seat was designed specifically for Goku. However, there is a post-credit scene that shows who the person is that's currently using the bacta tank, and it turns out to be the Marshal, who apparently survived, but is now being given cybernetic modifications by the reject from the Matrix movie, that stupid-looking mod guy we saw from a previous episode. I'm not even sure where to begin with this show. Everything about it has been awful. A barely coherent story full of character destruction, boring fight scenes, and it's all propped up by nearly constant nostalgia bait, not to mention all of the stuff that was blatantly ripped off from other shows and movies. This series is the epitome of a shallow Disney cash grab. But without a doubt, the worst part of this series is that it has firmly solidified the absolute failure of the sequel trilogy. I know some people wanted to believe that there would have been a retcon, and while I would have liked that as well, I never even for a second believed that it would happen. And that's because despite the sequel trilogy being hated as it is and being a complete failure, Disney will never ever admit that they were wrong. Instead, they will double down creating content like this series, using endless amounts of nostalgia bait, trying to convince the audience that the sequel trilogy wasn't actually as bad as it was. But no amount of cameos or references to older and better stories will ever erase the damage that Disney has done to all of Star Wars. But thankfully, that's the end of Episode 7.